Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Well, we begin by wishing Mazel Tov to King Charles III on this weekend of his coronation. Our Sedra is EMOR, beginning with Leviticus 21:1 and following. Now, most of us are familiar with at least some basics regarding the documentary hypothesis. In the simplest of terms, the documentary hypothesis asserts that the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, was written by a variety of authors over an extended period of time. In its original form, the documentary hypothesis suggested that the Torah is a composite of 4 independent documents: J, E, P, D. J represented a text that referred to God as Yahweh. E represented a text that referred to God as Elohim. P reflected priestly sources. And D contained the writings referred to generally as the Deuteronomist. J, E, P, D. Simple enough. You knew that, right? The fact that this hypothesis openly challenged the Mosaic authorship of all of the Torah aroused a great deal of concern in some quarters, with some even referring to the documentary hypothesis as an expression of anti-Semitism. Over time, the classical formulation of the documentary hypothesis has come to be rejected by most scholars. What we have today instead are hypotheses that large fragments of various documents were inserted into or removed from other documents by the editors. And one of those fragments, maybe the most significant, is called the Holiness Code, referred to as H, another letter. So now we have a J, E, P, D, and the newcomer H. This week, our Sedra is in the middle of H, which ranges mainly from Leviticus chapter 17 to chapter 76. H has a point of view. H wants the Israelites as a whole to be holy. Kadoshim tihiyu, you shall be holy. Whereas the first part of Leviticus reserves holiness to the Kohanim and Leviim, to the priests, the Levites. That's a huge difference. Holiness in H has everything to do with, for example, personal sexual behavior. Holiness in H has everything to do with a myriad of smaller laws that try to define what holiness on an individual level looks like. And in the process, H actually repeats the 10 Commandments, but in an expanded form. Whereas the holiness requirements of the priesthood have little resonance today, the texts of H still want to speak with us. And in the process, I have to admit that we can be more than a little troubled by some of the things we find in H. Much of it glorious. Some of the stuff, not so much. For example, I am not comfortable with a section of our Sedra that declares that the only ones fit to serve God at the altar are those without any physical defect or blemish. I don't like it. No one with a broken leg, broken arm, hunchback, limited vision, or has one limb shorter than another may bring sacrifices. Here, holiness is equated with physical perfection, and in so doing actually creates a Torah-based conclusion that people with disabilities are somehow less suitable to approach God with their offerings. After all, If the animals being presented for sacrifice are expected to be physically perfect without blemish, then surely the officiants must also approach physical perfection, right? That makes sense. All right. Now, we're going to pause right here for what in the law is called full disclosure. I am seriously hard of hearing. My vision is seriously impaired. I won't even mention the fact that I usually walk with a walker. All that being true, I don't like being told that such physical disqualifications can in any way stand between me and God. I don't like to read, as is found in our Sedra, that if I would profane sacred places by just showing up. And I don't like that such an attitude is enshrined in our sacred text and therefore has infected most of the way in which the handicapped are viewed by so many. One complaint, one other. Tucked quietly away at the very end of our Sedra, I ran into a second problem. First of all, a question. This is easy, everyone, right? Which Torah passage ended up by being referred to in Fiddler on the Roof? Right. Oh, okay. You got it. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Tevye says, very good. That way the whole world will be blind and toothless, close quote, Tevye. Several times in the Torah, in Exodus, in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy, we find assertions of what is technically called lex talionis. Lex talionis is absolutely not the same as Superman's nemesis, Lex Luthor. Lex talionis is the law of retaliation, most commonly referred to as eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Now, reciprocal justice is a core principle of the Hammurabi Code from which the Torah bases much of its fundamental legal teachings. Life for a life, limb for a limb. Actually, there's something very good about that, right? We shouldn't overly punish. A limb for a limb. But there is something absolutely out of whack here as well. Is every life really the full equivalent of every other life? I'm not providing the answer, and I know people disagree. Or is every eye fully the equivalent of every other eye? A moment's reflection gives me the answer, no. But that's me. There is no true equivalency possible, which is why the Talmud converts the clear expressed meaning of these texts into a system of monetary compensation. You pay the value of an eye and so forth. That's great. That's great, but the literal verses are still present in at least 4 separate places in the Torah. They are read and they are taught. The traditional Jewish schools will emphasize the true meaning of our verses as exemplified by what the Talmud did, but what the Talmud did is dramatically change what, in fact, the Torah is calling for. The original meaning is dramatically different. So why does that text trouble me again? Again, the same answer. Because it's there. Because those who read Torah without rabbinic commentaries see Judaism as a religion of terrifyingly strict laws. It has been said that no verse has been used more often against the Jews than an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Attitudes toward the handicapped and attitudes toward justice are no small matters. This Sedra found in the H Code, remember JPD? H Code is absolutely foundational to why I chose to become a Reformed Jew. I want those who study with me to be able to see that the Torah is a human document written and edited over several hundred years by scribes who, if you will pardon the expression, had their own axes to grind. I want my students to be able to hold aloft a Torah during Simchat Torah, celebrating the best of its moral and ethical visions, celebrating its unique and sacred role in our history, and celebrating how its truths have shaped much of human civilization, but yet fully aware of the need to read the text with open and critical minds. Hafoch bo v'hafoch bo ki kol bo. Study the Torah text over and over again because everything is there, the wisdom of the ages. And because, as I believe, as each one of us studies the text, that text grows in its power to shape a better world. That's it for today. Remember, documentary hypothesis, JBDH. Shabbat Shalom. See you next week.